episode 381 of Retro Encounter RPG Fans, currently bi-weekly podcast of many topics. My name is Zach Wilkerson, and I will be your host today. And we are here to talk about the second half of Disco Elysium, insofar as there is a second half. I learned that you can basically beat this game without even doing basically the first thing you're supposed to do today. So our conversation will probably jump all over the place, but this game, you can experience it in so many different ways. So before we dig into talking about the game, I want to go ahead and introduce our panel, starting with you, Aleks.
Hi, I'm a superstar communist cop, Aleks.
And Hilary.
I am communist art cop, Hilary.
And Ben.
Yeah, and I'm a communist sorry cop.
And I'm a communist superstar cop as well. Although towards the end, Kim gives an evaluation of who you are as a cop. And he said he's deeply communistic, but he also shows signs of incredible fascism. I don't know how those two things work together, but that's who he is. And I was like, yeah, that sounds about right for my version of Harry.
Oh, jeez.
Last episode we mostly talked about the first day. And I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you can play this game for up to 10 days. I'm not sure what would happen at the end of 10 days, but it was my impression sort of reading around online that you have 10 days to beat the game. But I think I beat it in 9, only because I dragged some things out. Because I thought that I would get pressed onto the end game, and I was right. And I wanted to clear out literally every single side quest I could and that I had available, because I just loved living in the world of Disco Elysium. It went into some... I did not predict the ending at all. I was like giving like these wild theories, and Lana was like, and it's just like so logical and beautiful. And there's some things at this ending that I'm really excited to chat about. There's some moments where he has a dream that I just thought were stunning. Some of my favorite moments in video games, and that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah, I've heard that as like a criticism of the game, that it's like a whodunit, that you can't really predict based on clues like what the actual solution is. But to me, that's like missing the point a little. But it is interesting. I don't think anybody would really guess the way it ends.
I mean, I was like, I think Harry's dead. And then I was like, I think Harry did it. And you're right, they're all tacky, but I've like grown up on like mystery stories and novels. And I think part of what it's doing is like looking into the ways in which we eat those narratives up. And that's not like the way that life or murders or whatever, that's not the way these things generally happen. And it's a lot more random than that in some ways, but also a lot darker than even I expected in a lot of ways.
Yeah, the solution is much more about like the world than it is the mystery. Yeah.
Yeah, it was not something I expected, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. So I think that we kind of ended our last discussion at sort of day 2, day 3-ish. In terms of the plot, we know that you wake up, you're disaster cop Harry, and disaster cop Harry meets very good cop Kim, very good cop Kim, as they're trying to discover who murdered someone in Martinez. And you go out and you investigate the body. Although apparently you don't even have to investigate the body to beat this game. I discovered that by looking at the list of achievements, which actually taught me a lot of things that I didn't do. And I was like, oh man, I need to play this game again right now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that yet, but I will soon enough. And then after that, it sort of leads you eventually to talking to the union boss, trying to find your gun. And you eventually get to cross over to the other side of the water lock, I think it is. Yeah. And you eventually discover, as we discussed, like there is basically this conflict going on between Wild Pines and the Union wants a seat at like basically like they want every single member of the Union to be like a chair in the company. And I can't imagine any capitalist company allowing anything even vaguely resembling that for the most part. And so obviously that's not going to work out. We think that maybe the body has something to do with that, because he was a mercenary working for Wild Pines, as we discover as time goes. And so, but as we were discussing, like the mystery is really just sort of the ends to allowing us into this world, into discovering this world, and talking to people. And one of my favorite interactions in the whole game is with the Hardy Boys, which are a group of sort of almost police for the Union, because the police, the RCM, hasn't really had a presence in this space. And at first, they seem like real jerks, especially the main guy, Titus.
Yep.
Just seems like the worst. And then he ended up becoming one of my favorite characters. And I think that gets to one of those ideas we were talking about with the last episode, where so many of the characters in this game come off a certain way, and then they are more than a plot point, and they are real people. Even like Joyce, in some ways, I think is really interestingly written. And so, yeah, I just thought that those interactions were really interesting.
Yeah, it's really, this game is just like, yeah, there's like the murder mystery at the heart of it all, but really that's just an excuse to talk to all these characters, which end up like being these really long, winding conversations with multiple paths you can take, different checks that they demand, that will vary depending on what kind of a character you're building,
Yep.
which you can actually achieve. And really, like, every conversation in this game is like kind of like a level of its own. And just like terms like it's like structured, the way like you kind of like come back to it, and have like these different interactions with it. Like, I find like all of these like different like little plot points in the game, like the church, and like the hypnotic dance music thing that's going on there, or like the three drunks like off the coast, or the Hardy Boys. They're all like these very, like, none of the characters in this game really like move a lot, but like you're moving back and forth, you're doing like a lot of jogging around the city, and coming back to certain characters as you learn more. And it's amazing how like much it can like bring this world to life, and like you keep learning different things about the characters, um, that just like really change the way that you're like looking at Harry, the way you're building Harry, the way you're role playing him, and also the way you're like understanding this world. So I just like really appreciate the kind of unique structure where it's like a very like relatively small fixed world, but the way you're moving between these characters and the way like the ideas you're learning are interacting with each other really add a lot of like color and flavor to the gameplay, and your particular journey as Harry as well.
Yeah, all of it builds so beautifully. I think that's one of the things that struck me the most, like in my first few days, is there's just so much room to build information back and forth between characters. Like they're relatively stationary, but any little thing you do has the capacity to kind of get a new option to talk with someone about it. Or just the way Harry goes from, hysterically telling Joyce, like, Mr. Everett's helping me find my gun, or taking health damage from sitting in Everett's chair, to, kind of building his skills and like having more complex conversations, and kind of, it really feels like there's a sense of development, and you're kind of building something with all these different characters the more you interact with them. I don't know. It's really neat.
Yeah, and I think kind of building off that, though so much of the game is dedicated to like building and fleshing out this world. So by the end of the game, a lot of the things you've done, I would say like 80 or 90% of the things you do honestly have really nothing to do with solving the case. But because they build out your knowledge and understanding the world and the types of people that inhabit it, and because like the solution of the case and then all of the events preceding it that lead into it are so tied in with that kind of the world and universe and lore and everything that they've created, it feels very satisfying, even if like on paper you were to list everything that you did. Most of it almost seems extraneous, but when you're actually done, it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, but I will take issue with you saying that me starting up a dance club in a church is extraneous. Okay,
But it's not. That's what I'm saying.
no, I'm
It
just kidding.
seems like it would be, but it's actually like super important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that what's interesting about that, and I don't want to get too far off the main story here yet, but I feel like that church side story is like sort of like the most major side quest
Hmm.
that you can engage in the game. And it one of the things that I thought was fascinating about it is that like so the church storyline to sort of back up for a second here. So it's when you get over to the other side of the water lock and you meet you see the church and you can't really get in, and then you meet these three people who all say they want to start a dance club in the church with Adonic music. Is that what it's called?
Anotic.
Melodic dance music,
Anodic,
yeah.
yeah.
Anodic dance
Mhm.
music. And Egghead is one of my favorite characters in the entire game. Egghead is a great name for him, even if he didn't look like he had an egg for a head. Because
Yep.
there's nothing happening up there except for music, dance, hardcore.
Hardcore to the mega.
Yeah. And so at first it just seems like the silly thing because you realize very quickly that they really want to use it to make drugs in the church. And of course I allowed them to do that. 'Cause
Or
why
if you
wouldn't I?
fail or if you fail a bunch of checks, like I did, you don't realize that quite so quickly, and it causes some problems.
Oh wow! So I want to hear more about those in a second. But you do that, and it just seems like this really weird, silly thing, and then it turns out to be the church people who are there currently. Like there were people who were originally working on that game across it, and like there's like this
Hmm.
sound spot, and like there's this weird crab man in the rafters. I never really understood what was happening with that, but I liked it. And it becomes like this way of like you discovering things about the Pale, and like they make all this supernatural stuff like vaguely scientific. And then eventually it just becomes like a place where like in my favorite moment in the entire game where Harry just like absolutely goes wild on the dance floor. And it was like weirdly joyful just to watch it in all its goofiness. And I thought
Hmm.
that storyline was really fascinating, talking about things that sort of feel separate, but like are such a critical part of building this world, both from like the community building thing that's going on here, but also like the weirdly unexplained supernatural, which becomes very critical later on.
It's also the church is also very thematically important for Harry's backstory. So there's kind of like a extra layer to you
Hmm.
like getting on the dance floor and doing that because it changes Harry's relationship to that space
Huh. I never thought
because
about that.
he actually had a very negative association with that space, and it's even implied that what had happened there before, like the reason he was there before, is partly why he like is the way he is now. So it's
Right.
almost like a rebirth when
Yeah.
you do that
Hmm.
in the church. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna add a little bit to that and say, yeah, if you are able to delve into it, you find out that there had been some pretty destructive and pretty messed up like police raids happening in that church, and that's basically what led to it being abandoned, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Harry's precinct did a raid on the church,
Yeah,
and
which is funny because there's all this other backstory about like neither Harry nor Kim's precinct really wanting to be in the area, and some other characters saying like, "Oh, you never, you're not here. We police ourselves." But apparently, that was not the case in this instance.
Yeah, and like a similar little quest you can have that's similar to the church in terms of like kind of like that more of like a character building interaction for Harry is and you get it very early on. It's like the quest to sing karaoke at the Whirling and Rags, the
Mm-hmm.
motel that you start off in, and once you get like a sad song on tape, which you can discover just behind a house along the coast, you can get back and and bring out your boombox. You insist to Gart that no, you have to do this. This means a lot to you. You have to pass a drama check, which I failed this time. I got on my first playthrough, and it was like a beautiful sad song sung quite well by like a baritone Harry. But this time around, I had like did anybody else get the horrific necktie for their playthrough? Like the interactions with it?
Yes.
I did not.
Yeah, so you know that necktie you start the game with, Zach?
Yeah.
So that can I don't know what the prerequisites are, but that can start talking to you like very early on in the game and
Yeah.
lead to like a whole
hmm
like really deranged quest line that
hmm
I pursued, and I'll get back to that. But The funny part is like the horrific necktie's voice is just like absolutely like ridiculous. Just I recommend anybody looking it up. But if you fail the karaoke check, instead of having like a proper like singing, you have the horrific necktie voice just singing the entire song.
Oh
And
no!
I missed that.
It was so good, and like it was my favorite part of it was that afterwards, like if you pass it, like I remember Kim being like genuinely like moved by your performance. But after this one, he's just like, you gave it your all, and like more than anything, like this is just like the perfect like metaphor for being an officer of the RCM. And I thought that was a beautiful moment, and a really good moment where Kim's just like doing his best to cheer you up.
Mm-hmm.
Zach, you didn't get the like necktie to talk to you at all. Like that
No.
didn't happen. Oh my
It did
god!
not
I didn't even
happen.
know that could. I didn't even know you could.
At least I don't think so.
It didn't in my first playthrough, so
Okay.
I'm not sure what
Oh.
exactly the deal is there, but yeah, I'll get to the necktie again later on because I had like the end of the quest is amazing with it.
I did not pursue it. I just let the tie talk to me occasionally and then kind of ignored it.
Oh man, that is, you know, again, like it's one of those things like where sometimes I feel frustrated that I missed out on parts of a game, but with this game, like I feel excited that I missed out on parts of it. But you know what's interesting is I want to back up for a second, kind of talking about that, because I think that because actually when I did karaoke, Kim wasn't there because he had abandoned me, because I said something horrific to him in the church when I was
no.
dancing. So when you try to get Kim to dance with you in the church, if you fail that check, which it's a red check, and I was like 57%, so I'm like, oh, I got this. And I failed the check, and you call him like a racist slur. You don't get to choose it; you just do it.
Oh god.
Yikes!
And Kim leaves, and then he has like a pretty sober conversation with you about what it's like to live in Revachol and Marcinez for him, and then he entirely leaves. And I think that one of the things I really liked about that was like it's not something you could have chosen to do on purpose, and the ways in which Harry, despite your best efforts, can sometimes totally just go off the rails. Anyway, Kim failing check. Other people probably passed that check, jerks.
I did.
So talk about that.
It's awesome. I love everything leading up to it too. You basically go through this series of you. At that point, I was just trying to get everybody to dance. And you leading up to the check, you tell Kim that there's an emergency, and I think it's a code 37, and you would just keep going on with this. Emergency on the dance floor. The emergency, not enough Kim. Like all these things, and you finally kind of get him to crack a smile, and then you can do the check. And if you pass, you get everybody dancing, including Kim. And aside from it being just like you kind of said, this really joyful moment with everything going on around you. Did anybody pass? There's a shivers check actually right after that, which is also really interesting. Did anybody else pass that?
No.
Okay, it's like it has some odd name, like engaging the hyperdrive or something. I have to check exactly like what terminology they use. But like you get a lot of bonuses for the more people you have dancing, and if you pass it, like either way, if you pass or fail, Harry kind of passes out on the dance floor a little bit. But if you pass the check to engage the hyperdrive, the city talks to you.
I think that might be a thing, even if Kim does leave. Maybe I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can't remember. There's so much text in this game. Like trying to keep it all straight.
Yeah, maybe you still get the chance to engage the hyperdrive even if you upset Kim. Maybe.
Yeah, it's an awesome moment. Regardless, and I think that even if you do fail it, it gets you, like that that joyful moment or that sobering moment. And I think it gets to this idea that like even if you're failing things in this game, it can still do things that are really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of interesting, I need to hear more about this necktie, Aleks.
Yeah, sure. So the horrific necktie just like starts talking to you. It happened to me fairly early on in the game. Just like has this ridiculous voice, just has like this very powerful energy. Really wants to just be your buddy. Calls you Breton. And as you're doing like different drugs and drinking specifically, it gets really happy. Like it ultimately just seems to like want you to be happy, but wants you to accomplish that through copious drinking and drug use.
That's probably why I abandoned the quest.
And as a superstar cop this time around, I just embraced it. I'm like, yeah, I'm a superstar. This is my necktie buddy. We're gonna do all kinds of crazy stuff together. So the kind of turning point with the necktie is when you're along the coast and you're talking to um, just like the three alcoholics. I forgot what their names are exactly.
Idiot Doom Spiral.
Yeah, Idiot Doom Spiral
is the
friends.
main one. Yeah, and then there's one that lays on the ground and just says Abigail, and that's like presumably his wife or former wife, like ex-wife or girlfriend or something, and he just repeats her name over and over. And then there's a guy he's like a vendor, you can buy things from him, the other guy.
Yeah, so those three just like are a really kind of more bleak look at alcoholism that you see in this game, but they're interesting characters, especially the idiot Doom Spiral guy. But the vendor, you can he offers you like a couple different drugs or booze, and one of them is like this bottle of like spirits that's like 98% alcohol, and like the necktie is just like starts like writhing around on your neck. It just like gets really excited is the way it's like described, and it's just like we have to get that, like how much fun we'll have. And it's like 300 real, but if you just listen to the guy's stories, he misspeaks that it's 3 real, and you just
that's why you have to listen to all those stories.
yeah,
Okay.
and you just give him 3 real, and he's like, okay, here's the here's the spirits. And so the necktie is just like, all right, this is like exactly what we've been waiting for. Like, let's wait for like an important moment to break this out, and we're just gonna go to Party Town. I'm like, okay, hell yeah, I'll just keep this on hand and wait to see what happens. So after the Ruby interaction, the necktie kind of spoke up, and he's just like, all right, take out the bottle, and I want you to put me inside of it. And I'm like, okay, sure, buddy. And it gives you like a bunch of chances to like opt out. It's like kind of discouraging like anybody who's not leaning into the hardcore like alcohol and drugs kind of character to do it at multiple points, because it's kind of like implied that the necktie is going to want you to butt chug that bottle of spirits. But anyways, you don't have to do that. You just put the necktie in the bottle, and Kim's just like, okay. And then you can kind of just like be like, yeah, my necktie's been talking to me, but he seems to have like a good heart. And it's like, okay. And then when you get to the tribunal portion, which is kind of where Harry like has to have this like kind of actual like physical showdown, the really only like kind of violent part of this game. The necktie is just like, all right, it's feel free to use me in this encounter. And sure enough, you get a hand-eye coordination check during the tribunal where you can light the necktie in the bottle and throw it at the kind of like main scab leader guy, and it just sets him on fire.
Oh my god.
Good old Molotov cocktail.
And as that's happening, you have this really heartfelt interaction with the necktie where he's just like, I've always just like looked out for you. He's just like, I hope you like go okay from now on. I was just trying to like make you have a good time. I hope you get through all your problems. And it was really one of my favorite interactions this playthrough. I was so glad I saw it through.
Oh my goodness. Oh. That's incredible. I got nothing that matches that. That's so cool.
But I would be interested to hear anybody else's kind of like the most rewarding quest line or through line that they went they took on in this playthrough. If you all have any.
You know, weirdly for me, and I promise we'll get back to the main story eventually here, listeners. Weirdly for me, it's and I think it was added into the Final Cut version, where you have the opportunity to go like pursue your political bent, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is
right. The political vision quests.
The
yeah,
political
those
vision
are
quests.
Final Cut editions, yeah.
and I was very communist in my playthrough, and eventually, like, you get this thought that like you need to organize. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna organize, and you go around and you try to find people to organize, and you get like a sensor or something that senses when you're close to other communists. um, and I eventually you find yourself with these like basically college. I think they're college dropouts technically, who are like these incredibly intellectual communist thinkers. I guess maybe generously is a way of generously putting it. And you join their book club. And the only way you can join their book club is by doing a lot of reading. Otherwise, you have this crazy check. And
Oh, interesting. Any
yeah,
book?
I actually think that when I first tried to pass the check, it was like 8%. And I had whatever it was in, like I was pretty high in it. And so then I went and I read all the books I could the next day, including there was a communist book that I picked up at some point. And
That's
then I had like
appropriate, at least.
a 92% chance of passing after I did all that.
That's awesome. I'm just picturing you going and like, yes, I read Dick Mullen and Man from Yamgo.
Exactly. That's the kind of stuff I was reading too. Yeah. It's really high class stuff. Well, what's interesting is that eventually you can get into conversations with them about like the politics of Dick Mullen. And like the things they're saying are like oftentimes very naive, and I think the game thinks of them as like these sort of pie in the sky thinkers as
it's heavily
communists.
implied that they also have not done the reading. So
Right.
when you go and
Exactly.
talk to them, yeah.
In the way that a lot of young people probably function, right? But
Uh-huh.
at the end, like they're talking, and like even though the game is like sort of like definitely jabbing at them, they like have like these like really kind of like beautiful ideas about what communism can bring and things like that. And Harry says something like, "Oh, they're so young," and like it becomes like sort of like this beautiful interaction for the idealism of these people, even though they're not really prepared for it. They don't really understand what they're talking about, and they're kind of just talking in the highest way possible about something. But I thought it was a really interesting way, and it gets to something we were talking about last time, where like anybody who plays this game, no matter where your political leanings are, you can find something there. I think this game is very positive towards those kids in a lot of ways, and admires their idealism. But they're trying, and in their own way, and they're so full of themselves, but also they're so young. And I think there's something like weirdly beautiful about that sequence, in the way that you interact with them. I really like that sequence.
Yeah, that sounds great. I managed to start that the the communist political vision quest on this playthrough, but I didn't have time to see it through all the way to the end. But that sounds great. I might go back and do that. I'm kind of interested in all of those political vision quests just to see what they're like. From what I've heard, I mean, kind of appropriately because Revachol is kind of presented as this city where every ideology has failed at one point in history. And I think all the political vision quests, like kind of you were talking about with the communist one, almost like jab at the ideology, like they kind of like make a mockery of it, while also kind of for like kind of something like communism, also seeing like the more beautiful side of it, like the idealism and how that's like worth maybe nurturing in kind of like young souls. So it's just like a testament to like how well this game kind of treats like all like the different like political ideologies it touches on, um, and
Yeah.
gives them all like yeah, like a bit of say, and like gives you an opportunity to buy into them, but definitely critiques some more than others. I don't think anything in this game is like promoting fascism, for
Nope.
example.
Yeah, it's very the way the game treats some of the other ideologies in the way it treats communism is very different.
Yeah.
I would say,
Mhm.
just in the characters that are chosen to portray or stand in
Yep.
for those ideologies, and then also what your exploration of those ideologies will then yield to the player. You get a much better experience with the more left end of the spectrum than you do with the more right wing ideas. So
Yeah, I definitely think it's like yeah, communism first, it like gives a like a fair shake, and moralism also, I feel like it gives a fair shake. 'Cause I think Kim, for the most part, like you'd probably characterize him as a moralist.
he is
uh,
he directly he identifies himself
oh
as
yeah,
one.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
working for the
Hmm.
moral intern.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
my favorite one of my favorite interactions was also just this time around I got like once you do 4 decisions in one of the ideologies, you get the like opt-in offer, whether you want to accept it into your thought cabinet. And when I rejected moralism this time around, it's just like kind of like mockingly was just like, oh well, it's the kingdom of conscience is already coming. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yep.
And then in brackets it's just like, even if it's very, very slowly.
Eventually.
Yeah, eventually.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was a good one.
I actually did opt into that one. I didn't quite finish the quest line, which I'm sad about, but I got pretty far with it. And there were some fun moments.
Yeah, what is that quest line, and like what characters does that involve? I've never done that one.
The smoker on the balcony and mostly
Oh,
his Sunday
okay.
friend. Yeah,
Yeah,
you meet him
I
again on
did
the
meet
beach.
them. Yeah.
You meet him again on the beach, and you're like, because you start looking, you're like, your volition, and I think your empathy too, starts saying like, hey, you need to figure out who really has the responsibility here. And you're like, responsibility for what? No, capital R responsibility for the well-being of everyone, the city. And so you go around trying to figure out who's responsible, and you get guided. Oh, he's probably someone to talk to about it. And of course, he says, well, you need to talk to the moral intern committee. So you get this quest line and they're actually in one of the airships, like the aerodromes. So you have to figure out a way to contact them, and at least this whole kind of fun quest line where you have to find someone who's an expert in radio transmission. And for me, it's Noid. I got to kind of be buddies with him, and you have to find an antenna, and it leads to this kind of cool sequence where they rig up uh, an antenna and a transmitter on the statue of Philip III to try and contact the moral intern and figure out who has responsibility and what's really going on here. And that sequence didn't go so well for me, unfortunately. I would have liked to see it through completely, or one of those situations where you sort of fail, but it still kind of is interesting. So what ended up happening for me is I got the regular old antenna, which I think means there's a better one I could have found. I had decent interfacing, and I was not using drugs or alcohol, so I failed some checks. So I ended up climbing the statue successfully, luckily, because it's interesting. I started the game way more focused on psyche and motorics, but I built up my physique a little bit too. So I made the climb up the statue to make adjustments, because there was lots of entropy interference, and actually there was a weird repetition of kind of like the ghost conversation in the intercom, but with Kim this time when we were trying to dial in the antenna. So you climb up to try to adjust it, and I failed the very difficult interfacing check to adjust it and knocked the head off the statue.
That's so sad how you like pass so many checks to get to that like crucial moment,
Yeah.
and then that's what this game does that very well sometimes.
But it was actually kind of forgiving, because it still let me ask my questions. But then I wasn't sure. It was getting kind of close to recording time when I was going back and like trying to investigate some of this stuff. So I wasted some of my time. Like, you're able to still talk to the aerodrome a little bit, and I started asking the person on the other end about themselves and their work-life balance. So I actually went back and directly asked, like, okay, let me talk to the committee directly. I want to know who has the responsibility. And she can't let you talk to them directly. So I was like, oh my God, this is so frustrating. And then I needed to finish the game.
Yeah, it's like a bit of a commentary on the layers of bureaucracy
Yep.
under liberalism. That's how I took the Sunday Friend anyway, and so it's kind of like
Yep,
seemed
they
like an
they just keep
extension of
going with that.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad to know that like they brought that back, because I thought like those were like, it was an interesting like sort of thread that I thought was like sort of dangling. I'm like, huh. Like I kind of got what they were going for that. I know that like eventually like I got the homosexual underground thought,
Yep.
and I was like, well, this is like the dumbest thing ever. I'm putting it on.
Yep.
And then at the end, it was like, you don't think about other people's sexuality as much anymore. Now you're a grown up. No bonuses granted.
Amazing.
And then you can talk to Kim, and Kim's like, "Oh, yeah, I see that you stopped." So yeah, I think that I like that they picked that up, because like with the communism one, like it's like characters who Cindy's like a little bit involved, but it's mostly characters who you haven't really interacted with for the rest
Yeah.
of the game.
Yep.
Does anybody have other favorite quest lines, Ben?
Yeah, did anybody else go on the date with Lillian?
Oh
I
yeah,
did. That was
No.
fantastic.
I totally ditched Kim to go do that. Absolutely.
Oh, I
Okay,
took
I
Kim
need to
with
hear
me.
about this.
Kim was on the date with me.
Oh, I didn't realize you could take.
Oh my-
It's
him
like a
with you.
very difficult check if Kim is there, I think.
Yeah, you get a penalty, don't you?
Yeah, it's like
Yes.
a -1 penalty, but my suggestion was high enough that
Nice.
I was able to pass it.
Yeah, so I think just Lillian's like a really interesting character. There's a fair amount of female characters in the game, but I feel like she is a really unique one, because she's not really connected um in term personally to like the events of the rest of the game, though she is very key to the very end of the game. But she is like she's a fisherwoman, and she's, her husband previously died. He basically died at sea.
And he was
And
like a heavy alcoholic.
yes, like the other men that are in the village when you go there. And that's kind of the way she talks about this, like a very common thing for people in that community when it was still more of a community. And so she was left behind with her twin boys and a daughter, and she kind of just like makes things work for them and for her, mostly by fishing and then selling it to restaurants that are in the more wealthy parts of the city. And then also, she just finds like stuff that washes up on shore. So, one interesting thing is she's carrying around a saber, which is like ostensibly for protection. And if the date goes well, then she'll actually hand it over to you.
I did not take that off the rest of the game.
Yeah, it's very cool, and she's just a really cool character. Despite going through all that hardship, she is very, like practical, and but she's still like able to have fun, and she kind of back and forth with you on the date. And like if you try to be a little more romantic, she kind of will push away your advances, but in a like compassionate way, that I just found like really endearing. And it's kind of nice to have this like tough but still kind of funny and sweet like single mom, that's kind of making life go round for her and her kids in this really otherwise kind of destitute place.
Yeah, she's really got her stuff together compared to most of the other characters in the game. And I remember like yeah, after at the end of the date where I did decently okay on, I think it was like like a passive check for suggestion came, and it's just like, yeah, you would need like 10 more years of getting your stuff together after
Mhm.
like the whole disaster to like have any chance with her.
Yeah.
Which yeah,
Aw.
fair enough. But one of my favorite parts of that date was because so I in an earlier interaction with Call Me Manana, he called me Tequila Sunset,
Oh yes.
and
Yeah.
I totally leaned into him like,
Oh
oh,
yeah, that was my name the rest of the game.
yeah, I never referred to myself as Harry this playthrough. I was always Tequila Sunset, and
Yeah, she tells you what it means.
yeah, she tells you what it means, which is basically that like it's like a name people in Revachol give to themselves, like particularly like alcoholics that are like kind of realizing that they're going to die soon, so they're kind of like their life is on the sunset phase.
Mhm.
So it's actually like an extremely dark term. And yeah, I was going around calling myself Tequila Sunset. I was the superstar cop Tequila Sunset all this time, and then that hit, and something in me just clicked, and I'm just like, I ended up, instead of choosing the option where it's just like, oh yeah, I'm still Tequila Sunset, I kind of just like, I guess I'm just gonna have to get a different name for myself, and
Oh.
yeah, it made her happy, and I think that is what might have gotten me the sword.
Aw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I did the same thing. Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen some posts on the Disco Elysium subreddit, from people who were alcoholics, and then they played this game, and it inspired them to quit and get help. So, which I think is a really speaks to like how powerful the game's like messaging about that is, like about addiction. And it does it. I think it does a really good job of like representing kind of that experience, and then also the way that it impacts other people, but like very empathetic and not like preachy or heavy handed.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think that that gets to like the way this game messages in general. Like it's it always wants you to sort of like see things as they are, because like you think about like the vast majority of fiction or narratives or even like memoirs about things like addiction or or even like writings about political issues, and it presents it oftentimes in such like a here's the way it is kind of way. Here are all the problems. But with Harry and his alcoholism, for example, like you genuinely get advantages from it in this game. Like it's actually like helpful to passing checks, to do drugs and drink alcohol.
Yep.
And but then it gives you interactions like that, or it gives you interactions with someone like Joyce, who in most narratives like this would be like this evil, horrible person, or Evart, who would also just be total. Actually, I think Evart's totally irredeemable, but it it has such a, and it's not like moralistic or like humanistic in a way that feels pandering. It's humanistic in a way that like looks at it sort of like, I think, with the kind of empathy that we need in our conversations about these things to actually be able to make progress, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, like we started off the podcast kind of talking about like how like returning to different characters as you progress through the game just starts revealing like these layers of like nuance to them. Like even like going back to Everard at some point, I agree that he's like a total scumbag, but there was I did get a maybe an empathy passive check at one point when I came back to him like late in the game, around the time that I was gonna, after I did like the favor for him to get signatures, and I ended up like forging one, and then signatures for the like kind of housing project in the coast, which is probably gonna negatively impact everybody who's living there. And so I forged it, and then I
Yep, me
got
too.
back to him, and he was talking like his usual kind of just like rhetorical garbage. And but then at one point there was a check that's just like when he says something lines, when he's talking about along the lines of like how much like he genuinely like cares about like the people in this town. It's just like I think he means it, like empathy, like came in with something like that. Just like he probably does. He probably like does actually care about like Titus and like the people who work under him and everything like that. Even though like, does that redeem him? Probably not. No. And yeah, similar with Joyce, like just like this liaison for like a huge corporation that just wants like its own kind of uh has its own like kind of economic stakes in Revachol. Really like easily unlikable character,
Yeah,
but
the company that brought in these terrifying mercenaries
yeah,
in the
yeah,
first place, by the way.
yeah. And but she also like, as you talk to her, just is genuinely like interested and worried about Harry.
She gives you a
Um,
lowdown on reality.
yeah, which is yeah one of the earlier quests you get, which is great. Yeah, she has a lot of patience with you, which is
Did
interesting.
anybody,
Just feels like a human character.
sorry to interrupt, did anybody see things through all the way with her?
I mean, I sent her off. I became Everart's puppet and sent her off. I didn't mean to, but just sort of the way the conversation went.
Ah, okay. So you mean like when she was in the fishing village?
Yeah, when she goes to the fishing village, you have a
Hmm.
conversation with her, and you can say like, "I think you should leave," which to me seemed like the right move, and then it wasn't.
That is a loaded conversation. I think that was one of the points in the game where I was like sweating the most. And then I was like, Kim, help me. And then the game was like, Kim doesn't know exactly what the right thing is in this instance. And I was like, no. There's a variety of things. She ultimately gives you a lot of power in the decision about like what happens between her gigantic company and the union. and you can say a variety of things. Like I think what I ended up saying was like, take out Everett, cut the snake's head off,
Oh right, yeah.
um, which didn't have any direct consequences because they talk about how Everett and his brother supplanted the last Union boss, which is something you can learn about. And then near the end game, you learn that they probably killed her
Ooh,
indirectly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So does she not leave if you say that then?
No, she still
No,
leaves.
she'll leave no matter what.
She'll leave no matter what.
Before the tribunal.
But she, it was sort of this kind of stalemate of her leaving, kind of collecting resources and information and trying to stop Wild Pines from like coming back in and, you know, taking over completely. And actually there's another check. Is it rhetoric? I think it's a rhetoric track. And you actually learn who she actually is.
I'm not sure if I did that one. I
Which
don't
is
remember.
what?
She's not just a negotiator. She's like top level at Wild Pines, like probably a member of the board.
I did find that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that now. Yeah.
Yeah, but that just leads that just adds a whole other layer of complexity to this whole thing.
Well, and that's the thing, like Aleks was saying, like where you can kind of see the humanity in everybody. Like it definitely understands that idea that like nobody thinks of themselves as the villain.
Right.
So
Mhm.
you definitely get the sense that like everybody, like they all have really like understandable or somewhat justifiable motivations, even if the end result isn't good. Because like in Everett's case, yeah, they supplanted the previous union head and then him and his brother, and then now they like basically run the union like it's almost organized crime. But they exist in a space where there was no police presence, there was no government or any kind of presence to keep the peace of any kind. So you can kind of see how they would view that as necessary. And then at the same time, Joyce talks a lot about how things could have been different, but the liberals won, right? And so if they won, then they get to be in power, and then you have to, once you have power, you have the responsibility that comes with that. So it's very interesting. I think it gives everybody a fair shake. Well, even though it has its own, like I think the game has its own opinion about the world and the consequences of a lot of those things. It definitely, you can see everybody's side, and that makes it way more like interesting to talk to everybody and
Yeah, you
learn
can
about them.
sort of see their motivations and see how they see themselves and see how the results of their actions may or may not align with what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think kind of to pull it back a little bit to
Yep.
the main narrative, that and I think her name's Klasia.
Mm-hmm.
Klaja.
Klasia.
Yep.
Is a good example of that.
Yep.
Because I absolutely failed whatever my first check with her was, because the first thing I did when I walked out of my room was I said some very, very rude things to her. It didn't work. My suggestion was not very high when I walked out of my room. But when you originally, after you talk to Titus, he sort of indicates that she knows the man who died, who turns out is this mercenary who had been involved in some pretty horrific war crimes, but she has this empathy for him and this connection with him, and I think that she is a deeply sympathetic character in a lot of ways, despite her love for this man who's obviously not very sympathetic. But I think that you find out sort of about her past, and eventually it turns out that like she's hiding information from you. She's the one who made the call. And her motivations are incredibly complex, I think, but also very simple, where it's really about her feelings for this person, but also her being on the run, and this idea that this is a space for people who sort of can't exist outside of the space. And I think that my interactions with her, which I didn't, you eventually discover that potentially you think that she might have been involved in the murder, because literally the man who dies is sleeping with her at the time of being shot. He like she's so sympathetic to me that I never even occurred to me that I would arrest her.
And it's really interesting the way the gameplay kind of treats that and her, because you get this whole little sequence with your volition, like when you're questioning her, where volition stops everything and is like, wait a minute, some of us have been compromised, which is an interesting like added layer, because you kind of get the feeling that Harry is not like viewing her objectively. And I think I had to do a check in the middle of that conversation with her to kind of snap drama out of it, because he just kept saying that she wasn't lying about anything over and over and over, and she would never lie and all this stuff. And I succeeded. And so after that, I had my drama telling me like, "Oh, we have to get back at her. She's a liar. She fooled me. I won't stand for this."
Yeah, it's interesting how volition kind of pipes in there, like puts a stop to the conversation. Yeah, it tells you that all your other skills are compromised and that like they're just like under her influence.
Hmm.
And so like therefore like you should just arrest her. That's really what volition wants you to do. She's
Yep.
like, don't listen to the excuses of any of your other skills. Like just arrest her. She's clearly lying to you.
And a
The
flight
interesting
risk.
thing about the interesting thing about volition is that it's like your psychological will to move on, like to move forward. So somehow it sees arresting her as like a kind of like a self-preservation type of thing, which once you find out more about Harry's past and like the heartbreak he had with his wife, it like starts to sound like volition is like trying to like purge those emotions into an arrest of her, when like really like a lot of the different skills have like a point that they're raising while they're like talking about her. And yeah, I think like I think Zach, you mentioned this, like in the long run, like it's not really justifiable to arrest her because it's pretty clear that she didn't actually do the crime, even though she is a flight risk, even though she has like a very complex history. um
Even
yeah, I
though
just
she's withholding information.
Yeah,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
she is manipulating you and
Hmm.
lying to you, and
Yep.
she's also manipulated and lied to everybody in the town too that
Yep.
she's interacted with, and
Titus
gets
gets pretty
them.
pissed off, for one, for
Mhm.
example.
And she's gotten them all involved into her mess, but at the same time, it's interesting because while she is connected, she ends up being connected to the crime. It's in a way that she has absolutely no control or even knowledge over. And all of that ancillary stuff, like her backstory and her interactions with all the other characters, are basically completely irrelevant to why it happened. And that's just such a, I think, like, interesting, like, thing for the game to do, um, is to have her be this like manipulative, chaotic force, and also not really be
Yeah.
responsible for the events of the game in
Well,
any real way.
and I think that the end game sort of gets to that idea really well. Like this, like I think this game is so interested in political human forces and how we're all sort of like the hero of our own story, right? And she's certainly the hero of her story. And Ruby, who we'll talk about in a second here, becomes the hero of hers, and you certainly are the anti-hero of your own story. But like discovering how the murder actually happened, and how he sort of becomes the hero of his own very messed up story. And then if you did the crypto quest, sort of
Hmm.
how it places that in this like much larger scope of perspective,
Right. Yeah.
um, I think
It
is really
calls into
fascinating.
question his own responsibility for everything too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that for me, like some of the thematic concerns of the game really started to crystallize at that point, and in that conversation. And we've skipped over, some of the finer details about her, manipulating people into helping her and things like that. But after you have that conversation, at least the first conversation, you eventually go back to her. I can't remember the exact sequence. Maybe it changes depending on how you approach it. She indicates that there's an eighth member of these Hardy Boys, and you've kind of known about her for a while. She's if you pursue a side quest, you realize that she is a drug runner in town.
Yeah, a Joyce quest, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it is a Joyce quest that Kim basically tells you not to do, and I of course did it because my Harry's not listening to anybody. But I was glad I did it because it taught me more about her, and then eventually, her Classia's basically her idea is that Ruby probably committed the murder because least that's what she's presenting to you, because Ruby was in love with her. And obviously Klesia had manipulated Ruby to some degree as well. And then and then eventually you have to go over to the lock, and I love the way the blind woman addresses you when you get over there. And she's just basically like putting you on the runaround, but eventually, leads you towards her. And you get like this sort of weird sequence where she's playing the sound that will kill you if you're not approaching her with Kim.
The pale emitter, yeah.
Yeah, the
And
pale
that brought in the
emitter.
cool information you're learning about the world and the pale.
Mhm.
Right, because she has to
Too.
go through the pale running
As a
the
lorry driver, yep.
drugs. Yep, as a lorry driver, and you can talk to the other older woman lorry driver, and she gives you some background on the pale and how it affects you. And so, like, Ruby's been doing experiments with radio technology to try and like negate or otherwise manipulate the effects of the pale. So then she turns that on you as a weapon. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating sequence, and I think that everything with the pale, I think, is really interesting, because I think you mentioned last time, Ben, that it was sort of like global warming, the stand-in in this game, and I hadn't gotten as much information yet to sort of understand that. And as you go further, I think it becomes more clear. But it also becomes like the way that people have to endanger themselves to make this world continue, but also the ways in which things are closing in, and it also feels like sort of like things are closing in on Harry. And I think there's all these interesting things about the Pale, but I also think, like, in and of itself, the interaction with Ruby is really interesting, and sort of the path that it leads you on. So what did you guys think about Ruby and that whole sequence?
There are so many opportunities to kind of present and learn extra information there. My tactic was to kind of grill her for as long as possible while not dying.
Yeah, I had a pretty high pain threshold stat this time around, so I was able to do it pretty no problem, shut off the thing. But unfortunately, I forget what stat it was that you
Oh
needed to
no.
talk her down, but
Oh
I
no.
did not pass that one, and that was just jarring, because I'm pretty sure I passed that the first time I played this game, and I was like,
So what
no,
happens if you don't talk her down?
she kills herself.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is really horrible because it's especially tragic because she has like no involvement in the murder at all, and like really there's like no reason for anything bad to happen to her. So
Oh gosh.
yeah.
Well, that's
Wow.
dark. That makes
Extremely.
sense. I mean, like but I have curiosity, like, so we know, and I can't remember the details of this. We know that she like seemed very prepared for the murder when it happened, right? Is there ever an explanation for why that's the
That's
case?
what
Yeah,
Claudia
it's
says.
right. It's a lie. It's a complete lie. There's
That's what
Oh,
no.
Claudia says. But if
Yeah.
you
I
talk
was
to Ruby,
also manipulated.
yep. If
Yeah.
you talk to Ruby enough, Ruby's like, nah, that was Claudia. Claudia said,
Yeah. It
let's
was
fake
Claudia's
some
idea. Mhm.
lividity.
Yep. And then when you return to Claudia and talk to her about that, like she will basically like admit it. And yeah, I mean it fits that her background because she's like a corporate spy. And so it's like, implies that, of course she's the most likely one to know what to do in this situation. Like why would this woman who's like a dock worker and a lorry driver like know what to do in that scenario?
It's really interesting. Because in that interaction with Ruby, like, I just wanted to turn the thing off as fast as possible. And so, like, I just went to go do it, like, as quickly as I thought I could pass the check. So I didn't get as much information out of her as I probably should have. And I actually think that it made some checks later a little harder, because I didn't talk to her for as long as I could have, which again is
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it does like 3 points of damage to you, and
Yep.
so after that, it stops doing damage to you while you talk to her. So you can basically like talk to her throughout
Huh.
all of her dialogue and exhaust it without taking
Okay.
any further damage.
I will keep that in mind in the future.
It's a good pro tip.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you wouldn't know that. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
That section is really fascinating, but then I think, and one of the most critical junctures of the game happens immediately after that, right?
Yep.
So like you
Mhm.
leave Ruby, you come back, you're saying that you're gonna, I think you're actually saying you need to go talk to Claudia, right? Or maybe you need to go in the Whirling Rags or something. Like
It's
you need to go back
It's
there.
to go to the Whirling Rags. Yeah.
yeah, you basically get the tip, and you can get it from other people too if you talk to them a lot. That I think Joyce also tells you about the tribunal, but she doesn't know exactly when it is.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
Ruby will confirm, like, no, this is going down. You need to.
Hmm.
Yeah,
She
you can
didn't even.
also
She didn't tell me it was going down, so I think they just told me to go back. I
you can
think.
also talk to the guy, the scab leader, who's one of the mercenaries, and he will tell
Yep.
you if you have enough information about the murdered guy.
The
Then he will,
deceased, yeah.
yeah,
Right, because
who
Joyce gives you the opportunity to interrogate him, right? That's how you get like that kind of quest opening.
She tells you it's a bad idea, but you can do it anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And then, like,
Yeah.
as you're talking to him, like, it keeps being like, you need to stop talking to this guy right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you get back, the tribunal, which is, the mercenary group that the man who's murdered was a part of, is sort of executing against the Union,
The Hardy Boys
the Hardy
specifically
Boys,
for killing their fellow
for killing their
mercenary.
fellow mercenary, yeah. And it can get pretty violent.
Yeah.
I've heard that because my Harry jumps in front of them, and then I think Harry killed a couple of people. Some other people died, and I think maybe 4 or 5 people died in the interaction. Even 6 actually died in the interaction in my run. But I think there's a way you can only have 1 or 2 die. I don't know. I've just sort of from what I've read. But also in that interaction, Kim can be injured if you don't pass a check. Can be injured and get sent to the hospital. Which we'll talk more about where that can lead you. I didn't actually get that because I saved Kim, thank goodness, during that, because I'd finally, right before that, gotten the achievement that said you've reached max trust with Kim. Like I
that's a
improved my
requirement.
relationship with Kim
Yeah.
over the course of the game. But yeah, it's like a moment of like shocking violence. And like I think that maybe one of the reasons they called me a fascist is because I got involved in that violence and I shot my gun a few times because this felt like the right thing to do, but it probably wasn't. So how did that interaction go for everybody else?
Yeah, so I'm curious, was anybody able to figure out that there was a third member of the
Yes.
mercenaries?
Yep.
Okay, because I've never, like, both times in my playthrough, I mean, I knew because I played it before, but that didn't actually have Harry figure out that there was a third person.
I mean, I think that I knew there was a third person, but like I never interacted
Well,
with
a
that
third
person.
in addition to, like, because like
There's the woman, there's the scab leader, and the
right.
murdered guy, but they bring in
They
someone
bring in
else.
another one, so
Yeah.
there are technically
Killer.
4.
Gosh,
and
how did I figure that out? I think it might have been Joyce. I don't.
Oh, okay.
That would make sense.
Yeah, so when, like, if you do investigating, you talk to the scab leader and stuff, and you try to investigate them and find the armor and those quests, then you do find out that he's talking to you. Like, I forget if you intercept a call or you find a recording, I think, of him, the scab leader, talking to another mercenary, and so you find out there's 2. But then when I show up on the scene of the tribunal, there's like another guy and with like a sniper rifle and like full armor, and Harry's like what the hell? There's another guy we didn't even know about. And then yeah, which I it's interesting that you can figure that out, because like I was like, oh, like, I don't know how I would have even begin to know that there was like a 4th mercenary.
Yeah, this playthrough I also didn't hear about the third one. I think I did on my first one, but yeah, I can't quite remember what it was. But Joyce would definitely make sense as the source that you could get that info from. But yeah, the tribunal for me, like I said, like immediately after the whole Ruby interaction, which was pretty messed up for me this time around, that's when I got my necktie voicing up. So that was a bit of weird comic relief. So I put him inside the bottle, and then yeah, during the tribunal, I got to throw a Molotov at the scab leader, and then stuff just escalated from there. Passed the authority check to save Kim, and yeah, I also lost like I think around the same amount of people as you, Zach, like 4 to 6 people ended up dying there.
Yeah, I also lost Angus, the big guy,
Yep.
the older one, the skinny old guy. His name's like Shanks or something like that. I can't remember his name, but and then Glenn, who's like the long haired guy who was
Yeah,
like,
I think
guess
Glenn and
his
Angus
close friend.
are the 2 that you will lose no matter what you do, if I'm
Yeah.
remembering correctly from like what I read.
I believe so.
Shangy, you can give him an opportunity to run away, I think, which
Oh, okay.
didn't happen. Actually, wait, no. Yes, I think it did because I was definitely that person that was like, I'm definitely a pacifist when I do role playing a lot of the time. So I was exhausting all the other options. I didn't want to just immediately shoot anyone. And one of the options is to like mention something about Wild Pines is gonna like this. They're gonna, come in and get you. They're not gonna like the way you're, going vigilante or something like that. And that actually gives him the opportunity to run away.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
maybe that's what I should have done to save more people. I didn't end up talking much at all this time around because like the combination of my half light just being like we need to attack now and like having the necktie, I just like basically immediately when that started I threw my Molotov.
That's
yeah,
fair.
Yeah.
I think the main thing that talking does is give you it doesn't
Bonuses.
make yeah, bonuses to when you do take
Take
the
the shot.
shot. Yeah.
Which
Okay,
which
okay.
I was frustrated. Happy for
Yeah,
the
so
bonuses, but also frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's an interesting. I mean, because so you have to take the shot. Is that accurate then?
pretty
Pretty much.
much.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, did anybody fail the shot?
No, but if
Nope.
I failed my first playthrough and Titus dies, I'm pretty sure.
Oh,
You fail
okay.
a shot,
Yeah,
and
so
the lawyer, she
wow.
dies as
Okay.
Yeah.
well.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it actually is a negative regardless. It's
Yeah,
like
it's
a
pretty
passive.
significant.
It's not a pacifist thing. That's
And
fascinating.
the first bullet that you get fired at, if you don't dodge that and you don't have the T500 armor, do you end up dying there?
No, but you do
No?
take damage.
Okay. Oh, you just take health damage. Okay.
Yep.
Hmm.
Fair enough.
And can Kim miss? Did anyone have Kim miss the shot?
I did not have Kim miss the shot. And actually, I was misremembering a little bit. I actually think I did not take the first shot. And what it does is it keeps the, major new like armored guy, it keeps him in better shape, which changes, I think that actually has one more of the Hardy Boys who charge him get killed.
Okay.
And then did
Actually,
he
I
not
think
end up
maybe
dying?
Titus. Is that Titus? I redid it actually because I lost Titus and I was sad.
I understand it. This game actually, we didn't talk about this, but if you want to, you can save scum the crap out of the game if you really want
Yeah, you can
Yep.
totally break it through save scumming.
Yeah.
I wish there
As long as
was.
you have points to invest
Right.
to
Yeah.
like change things.
Yeah, true. I do wish there was like you could initiate a setting that prevented like quick saving, like or just
Mhm.
like it your only way of saving is just like constant like auto saves, like kind of like Citizen Sleeper does. It would just like I don't know, it'd be interesting to have a playthrough that just like there's no possibility of save scumming, so you have to roll with every single failure you get.
Hmm.
Because it's so like if you have like a save file that's just like a couple minutes before something bad
It's so
happens, it's so
tempting.
tempting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that the level of violence there, and the way it boils over, like sort of pressing these two organizations together. And I don't think like the mercenaries, like you find out like all these really horrible things about the man who died. Like he was, I'm not sure if the story is true. I can't even remember if we find out that it's not true at some point that he was found in a leaf compactor or something.
Mhm.
You can actually tell that story at the tribunal.
Yeah.
I did.
To
Yeah,
the
okay,
other
Yeah,
so
I did, and
yep.
it helped me pass a check at some point.
Yep.
But the ways in which it pulls these forces together that are sort of like out of your control and out of their control, and just like sort of the systems that they're existing in, but also the violence that is sort of inevitable from it, I think is it's shocking. Like I walked into it because I had no idea the tribunal. I knew the tribunal was going to happen, but I didn't know it was happening when I walked into it, because Ruby didn't tell me that. And so for me, from my experience, it was just like it was totally out of the blue. Even though I knew at some point that Kim might end up. I think he gets hospitalized if you don't save Kim during
Yeah.
that.
That's right.
So
And
he's just gone for the rest of the game.
yeah,
Yep.
which I can't even imagine how the rest of this game would play out without Kim around. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting scene.
So I know that like whether you have Kim or not and are able to like bring him to the island can drastically affect the end of the game, because whether he's there to vouch for you can like when you finally end up reuniting with like your precinct, that can like really affect what like Harry's kind of fate is. And I know like if you go it alone, then you have like the lowest chance. I think having Kuno um might help like a little bit. And
Because
like
there's a witness. I was gonna ask,
yeah,
how
yeah.
does Kuno factor in?
Yeah, I imagine he'd be a pretty chaotic witness, but maybe he gets the job done. Did anybody have Kuno? Anybody experience that like ever? Like having Kuno at the end of
No.
the game?
No.
That's a
I
shame.
want to go back to one of my old saves and
And
just
do
fail
it.
that check just to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, what were you gonna say, Ben? I'm sorry.
Oh, all I was gonna say is it's I think the tribunal is really interesting in terms of like the themes of the game. So it's kind of presenting you um it's very like an anti-imperialist scene
Mhm.
because you're seeing the effects of in this case a corporation, but a corporation empowered by the ruling government over a country that has been defeated in war and is thus like basically occupied as a territory of this ruling group, and how they're able to just send in these armed military squads at their own discretion with no oversight and no consequences to them. And then they get to basically enact justice as they see fit. And that's very similar to the kind of things that happen all over the world as a result of Western imperialism. And
Yeah.
because this is a game made by people from Eastern Europe who kind of have an understanding of that kind of society, or a society that has collapsed and has had that
Well, the
situation happen.
developers are Estonian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they have some firsthand Soviet Union kind of
Well, and
experience, I think.
yeah, and specifically like the the period after the collapse of the Soviet
Yep.
Union, I think is what
Mhm.
they're drawing on. But I've also seen like interesting. I saw there's a really interesting Reddit post from someone from Iraq, and I might add a link to it in when we do the article for this
Yeah.
episode. But talking about how they related so much to the game, um, both because of the kind of beauty in a broken place kind of theme to the game,
Mhm.
but also the kind of anti-imperialist themes. And I think that this tribunal situation, how horrible it is, and the destruction of it, and also the way it feels very unfair and very arbitrary and
Right.
very pointless,
Hmm.
ties into that theme and is very understandable and relatable for people from very different places that have all been at the receiving end of colonialism and imperial violence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in so much as it can, it also sees the mercenaries as like sort of a tool of that imperialism,
Mhm.
right? And I
Yes.
think that the way that they address the RCM and like how they're probably as just an organization in terms of policing as you have in this game, right? But like they're not, of course,
Mhm.
but they don't have no real power.
Well,
Not
yeah, and
really.
a lot of people see them, like people you talk to and Martinez see them as like collaborationists with the coalition
Right.
government.
Or
Um,
pawns of.
mhm.
There's a whole sub thing that we didn't go into actually about how Ruby kind of plans the idea that Harry is the pawn of a drug lord.
Isn't it related to the raid on the church too?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think if you do end up inquiring about that later in the game, your precinct basically tells you like, no, that's not true.
Yeah.
Which of course it almost certainly is.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
That's fascinating. That's like all kinds of stuff that I did not uncover.
Yeah, but it's also suggested that the RCM is like was created out of the remnants of the People's Army from when Revachol was communist. So
Right.
Yes.
it it kind of gives you both. It's giving you the perspective, oh, these guys are just a group of people empowered by the coalition to do their dirty work, but then it's also that they are actually, there is a history of them being a grassroots people's movement also. And so it's really interesting that they kind of occupy both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as we're talking about this, like I think as frustrated as I was by having a very high encyclopedia stat, and I was, um, I think that I cannot think of a video game that looks at like sort of like the way the sweep of history in this fictionalized space. This way, the sweep of history. I think the reason it's so effective is because it can sort of divorce itself from the biases that we have as players, right, about these spaces and these places. And no matter how much we read, we all sort of have our ways of viewing, political or not or human problems in all these different parts of the world. And I think that the way it addresses the way the scope of history and the sweep of history um, sweeps people under the rug and the impact that it has is unrivaled. And I think that fictionalizing it to the degree that they do, while also being so driven by things that really happened, is what allows it to have sort of that power and the clarity that it has.
Yeah, they walk that line pretty expertly.
Yeah. So after that, it obviously, if Kim goes away, I think I'm not sure how it would work, but you have the opportunity to go recruit Kuno to be a co-detective, which seems kind of like a lovely idea. Like you're gonna put this kid on maybe a slightly better path. I'm not sure if being a cop is a better path or not, but whatever. I don't want to go too far down that road, but it certainly it's a really interesting way of doing it. But for all of us on this podcast, and I think the best ending, right? You save Kim, and then you go back to investigate. And if memory serves, the next place you go is actually back to the crime scene, and you figure out where the shot must have come from.
Yeah, and
Because you
you
realize,
can do that before the tribunal too.
oh,
You
Yeah,
can do the
I did that on
ballistics.
my first playthrough. Yeah.
wow,
Mhm.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but you don't. It doesn't. And you can go to the island and like look at different spots, or the not, or you go to the other side. Sorry, you go to the other side of the shore. You know, the other shore, and look at the
Mhm.
spots. But I don't think you can, figure anything out before the tribunal
No.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still like remains like really ambiguous, and you need like a crazy high visual calculus stat to be able to do that earlier.
Wow,
Mhm.
that's cool. I had no idea. Well, I didn't do that. I did it after the tribunal. And you discover that the shot must have come from an island in this space that you've never been to before. And it's like not even, it's like basically hinted at this island existed, but like not in the way that a mystery novel or a TV show might normally do it, where it's like, it's enough that you know that you're going to have to go there eventually. Like for me, it was just like this wasteland place off in the distance, sort of as a result of, wars involving the coalition and stuff like that. um, and so the way you get over there is via boat. You go over on what's her name's boat?
Lillian.
Oh,
Lillian's
yeah.
boat. And when you get there, you are sort of exploring and trying to figure out what happened there. And as you're exploring, eventually, and I'm not sure if you can skip this or not. I'm really glad I didn't. You can take a nap, and then you don't realize you're having a dream, but Harry's having a dream where he's like kind of walking around trying to find Kim. And he runs into a woman who is Dolores Day is her name, right? Who is supposed to sort of be like the goddess, not really a goddess, but like I don't know, it's
Kind of
almost
the
like Mother
Jesus figure.
Teresa. Yeah,
Yeah, like
Jesus,
a
Mother
yeah
Teresa. This like weird
savior
combination
figure.
of things.
Yeah, they have this just really quickly, like I guess his like in the history of this world that we're in, they have at least a lot of the isolas have this like innocent eccentric system where every once in a while there are like these people who are deemed innocents who are basically kind of Christ-like figures that like are supposed guide humanity, and like most of humanity accepts their leadership when they come around. And she's the most is she the most recent one? I think she might Dolores Day might be the most recent one.
If memory serves, she was around in the last 100 years, I
Yeah.
think. But regardless, when you go in that dream, eventually, like you're walking around and you get to walk on water, and then you run into someone who is sort of initially presented as Dolores Day, but you realize that Dolores Day is really Dora, who is Harry's ex fiance. Actually, they were never even actually married. Um, who has to me like this heartbreaking and sort of vaguely beautiful in some way interaction with Harry about like the interactions they had. And she calls him insane on a couple of different occasions, and just like how horrible and truthful the things that she says to him are, but also just like the pain that he's feeling. And I'm not sure how many of you guys made the phone call
Yeah,
on the west side of the
I
lock.
did, yeah.
But I did, and obviously that was a very painful phone call to have. Kim had gone away. I'm not sure how that impacted it. But the way that this game looks at both large histories of this game, but also the personal history of Harry as well, and how history just like impacts these people in these different ways. And I just think that sequence is heartbreaking. I like the fact that she's almost like a goddess figure, like he put her on a pedestal, and that was part of the problem. It's such a rich interaction, and I love it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most memorable moments of the game. And interestingly enough, to answer your question, I didn't get it this time. There is actually I slept on the bed, and it just didn't happen. The sequence didn't happen, and I think when I woke up, I think it was Inland Empire piped in and said something along the lines of like somehow you didn't interact with X, Y, or Z, and like it described in like very vague ways. I think one of the things it said that you could have interacted with was like some book in the bookstore.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, there's like three separate things in the game that if you interact with them will prompt like kind of like a much more like clear, vivid memory of um, Dora as part of like Harry's past. And I didn't get any of them this time, and so I didn't get the dream sequence, and Harry never really rediscovered that aspect of his past.
Did you talk to her on the phone, Alex?
I didn't know.
Yeah, I think that's one of them.
That's probably another one. And yeah, there's one more that's just slipping my mind.
It's probably the case file thing, the notebook you find in the garbage, I'm guessing. That
Oh
causes
yeah,
him to
your
pass out.
ledger.
Yeah,
There,
because I sifted through a lot of it, but not all of it this time, so that
Yeah.
might be another one. Yeah.
there was like an actual like really interesting thing that happened with the ledger, and I think that might also have it be a clue. Like the wind started to take away one of the pieces of paper in the ledger that I think had something about her on it. And
Right.
you have the opportunity to either look at it or let it go. And my shivers told me to let go of the paper, so I let go of the paper.
Wow,
Oh,
that's very cool.
that's interesting.
But then I interacted a lot with the stained glass window, and I got a quest to like give
To
Dolores D
present
a figure.
her
Yep.
figurine, and I got that one too.
Oh,
Yeah,
mhm.
I was very confused by that because I was like, I'm in front of the window right now. Where is she? Why won't you take it? But yeah, then I realized why later.
Yeah, so I thought this was like definitely a mandatory part of the game, and I was so surprised that I didn't get it this time. Like I thought it's such a key part of Harry as a character, so it's cool that they allow you to miss it.
Yeah, that's just contributes even more to the
Yeah.
replayability and
Well, I
yeah.
guess it makes sense if you're not delving into her at all, and you're not like bringing up his memories of her, then I guess there wouldn't be anything to
Right.
prompt
Yeah.
And it's
And
like
a dream sequence.
oh, go ahead, Hilary.
oh no, I was just sorry. I was just gonna say I think there is sort of an opt like at least in that moment like that I got with the ledger, it feels like there are kind of two paths there where you can sort of like opt out and be like, nope, whatever this is, I'm not gonna because you're getting warnings from your volition and your inland empire being like, maybe you don't this isn't a good idea.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the same thing is true during the phone call. Like you have to do that a lot of times. At least I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
To even make the phone call. And yeah, I think that's an interesting element of role playing. Like you can sort of role play Harry to let some of this go.
Yep.
I was definitely not going to do that because I was interested. As the player, I was interested in what happened to him. But yeah, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, and it didn't feel like I wasn't particularly like trying to avoid any interactions, and there were times that I'd be interacting with things and there'd be like one of my skills would pop in saying like, oh, like something about like a woman, or like I'd be looking through like the ledger, and even just like opening the ledger in the first place is like some kind of a check that could reduce your morale because you just feel like you might discover something you don't want to see in it. um and yeah, I was just like completely caught me by surprise that I didn't get the dream sequence.
Yeah, I mean, I would like this game less if I didn't get it, but I think it would be interesting on a second playthrough not to. Yeah, but I mean, after that, we're really at our end game, or we already are in the end game, but really in the final scenes, where you discover this very old man who's a communist who's lived on this island for what, 40 some years?
50 years,
Since
I
the
believe.
war,
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's a complicated and odd character who there are reasons for that. And again, because you discover that he's the one who actually committed the murder, and it is, I think, from a narrative we've come to expect perspective, like a deeply unsatisfying ending, which is the point, and so I found it satisfying as a result. In the ways in which we try to like piece together things that make sense in the world, but there are things that we can't see and all those other things. But also, again, like it's a person who's there as a reminder of the consequence of history. Even if we don't see it, we don't know it, we're not aware of it. And it turns out that, he's not really all there, and there are reasons for that, but also like it was, maybe, at least in my playthrough, it was like an act of jealousy. It wasn't an
Yeah.
act of like
Yeah, it's
pro-worker or anything like that.
misogyny.
Yeah,
Specifically,
misogyny
yeah.
and jealousy,
Yeah.
which I think is not at all what I would have expected. If you told me a communist on an island committed the murder, I'd be like, oh, that kind of makes sense if you kind of loop that in. But no, like they turn it on its head again, and it doesn't make the logical kind of sense that a mystery novel might normally.
Well, it makes a
Um,
lot of human
yeah,
sense.
exactly. Human and logical sense, not the same thing, right?
But it definitely doesn't follow the, whodunit kind of format that we've all come to expect.
Yeah, and part of what I found interesting about it is that when you first, if you do like if you make 4 fascist decisions, so you get like the offer to like opt into fascism, I think like the whole tirade, I don't know if it's your endurance, one of your physique skills offers it to you. And it's basically just like hating on like women. It's just like a totally like misogynistic like ideas that it's throwing at you as like the beginning of like opting into fascism. So I found it interesting that like with that in mind, they made this like like communist character ultimately like just like a misogynist. And I think there are a lot of clear parallels between him and Renee, which who is like the fascist uh old loves like the royalty and like all like the
Hmm.
old like traditionalism, who's playing like forgot
And
what the game is,
he
playing with the
mentions,
bull. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
he mentions him too.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
so it's really interesting the way they drew those two characters who are both clearly like the same age and like just opposite sides of the ideological spectrum, but are both dealing with like these deep like personal issues.
Yeah, and you get the sense that so like he talks a lot, the old man who you find, the old sniper, he talks a lot about how like he's just spent all of his time like watching people through the scope of his rifle, and then also like reading the like political theory that he has. And so what you, I think, what they're commenting on is this period of intense isolation mixed with his like post-traumatic stress disorder from the war, and like the collapse of the society he knew have combined for him to create this like extremely like this extreme ideology that's so far removed from the reality of what existed in his time that it's become basically like unintelligible and impossible to understand.
Hmm.
And that in a way has it like basically made him reactionary. And
Right.
he talks about how everyone else is a reactionary or revisionist, but in reality that's what he's become. Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, it's like communism without the community too, right? Like
Hmm.
he looks at everything through a scope. He looks at
Right.
everything as something that is other from him,
Right.
which is a hallmark of fascism.
It is right. It
Yeah.
is a reactionary worldview. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's the consequences of constant war and
Hmm.
isolation. Yeah,
Yeah.
which are the opposite of what communism's ideology is supposed to
Right.
be. Yeah.
the isolation component of this whole sequence is kind of wild. I know we'll get into that more, but this is the man who's been on that island since the war,
Well,
right?
he does leave.
Yeah, he does leave, but
Yeah.
he doesn't. And I know it gets like I know he goes into the thing about like he was using the tunnels at first, so he was more isolated at first, but then people kind of started to forget, so it was easier. But still, he didn't really interact.
Yeah, I
very
think by
much.
the time that he started to interact with other people, he had already become so convinced of this, like, I'm a soldier in enemy territory, that he doesn't really interact with anybody
Yeah.
in a real human way. And then by the time that you find him, he's been, like, I think sick for so long that, like, he hadn't left the island in, like, a very long time, is
Yep.
the implication. Yeah.
That sounds about right.
I mean, I think it's such an interesting thematic bow, that even if you haven't done the cryptids quest, which I did,
Yeah.
it would still be, I think, thematically powerful, because having done the political vision quest, it's sort of like that. It's it's a lot of ways it's commenting in the same way. Like, it's just this book club. They talk about the ideas and they sit in this room, and he, like, comes over there, and like that. There's some beauty to what those young people can do and what they believe in, and he's lost all of that. And it's the consequence of imperialism and all kinds of things. Um, but I think that it gets to that same idea of, like, again, like I said, communism without community and without really being in things. Like, I think, like, honestly, like, Mignana is maybe like the most sympathetic character in this whole game, in some ways, because he's like there and actually, like, interacting with people. But if you've done the cryptid quest, and I'm guessing all of us did,
Yes.
um,
Mhm.
you actually, one of the cryptid that the woman has been looking for, comes out.
Insulin Phasmid.
Mhm.
Exactly. And it is such a weird thing that, like, even though I saw, like, there was, like, an achievement related to it, I was like, it never occurred to me that it would be like this. And it has, like, this sort of weirdly distant kind way of interacting with you, and sort of, like, talking about, again, like, sort of like the way that humanity comes and goes, and how, like, all of these problems and all these things that we think are involved, like, sort of taking it from even a more macro view, than, like, all these other people who think they're the hero of their own stories. Like, it's all of this worry is not going to come to something, at least the way I read it. And I thought it was, a weird, really weird, and somehow tonally and thematic and effective way to end the narrative.
Yeah, one part of that interaction I thought is like such a beautiful interaction, and I know like one point you get to like tell the Phasmid like what you think about it. And I just like I immediately clicked the prompt that's just like, you're the kindest creature I ever met, because it really is. And it's just like such a positive interaction in a game filled with kind of like negativity and like collapse, and like everybody just like trying to like get by, but here's like this creature that's just kind of like separate from it all, like pretty much like physically as well, like it's also like been isolated, much like the deserter. um and so you finally have like this nice interaction with it, and it kind of reveals more about the Pale too, how like the Pale is entirely humanly constructed, um, which brings it back to like to that like kind of potential allegorical ways of like connected to like global warming, and how like the Pale is like basically destroying the world and like everything in it, and like kind of like the whole like collapse of history, like as humans have constructed history to be like this linear progression. So yeah, it was like a surprisingly like beautiful and unexpected way to like thematically bring together a lot of elements of the game.
Uh, this is a little bit of an aside, but I think it's a good time to bring it up. So I played through some of this game before, uh, and it kind of inspired me to check out the cryptozoology museum in Maine when I
Oh,
was there,
amazing.
and that's without even knowing like the full story or the ending. And now that I know the ending, I'm even happier that I went.
Yeah, it's, again, it's funny because it feels like this dumb side quest, right?
Mhm. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Um,
Kim
it feels
berates
like
you
more
pretty much.
tangential. Like we
yeah,
talked about how all of these side quests are like feel tangential and unrelated to the main plot. This one feels the most
and then
unrelated.
it becomes the
It
most
becomes super
critical.
important. Yeah.
It's incredible. I didn't even pursue it on my first playthrough because I was playing like a straight cop who gets sober, and like I'm just like, you're right, Kim, this is all pointless. And
Yeah,
yeah, lo and behold.
yeah. Again, like the way that we try to, like, organize information, and I like this idea. because I think that it gives you an optimistic note, but it doesn't give you an immediately optimistic note.
Nope.
It's like things are going to get better soon, but they can get better eventually. It's almost like this: you're doomed now, but don't worry, things sort of cycle.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like the saying in the church.
What's saying? I don't remember that one.
The like afterlife, death, after
Mm.
death, life
After
again.
death, life.
After the
Yeah.
world, the pale. After the pale, the world again.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
That's like cyclical nature of life. Yeah.
Mhm.
I just want to say, because we didn't talk about like coming back to the mainland and like
Yes.
having the interaction with
Mhm.
the precinct members. That Jean is just one of my favorite characters. Like just the way he talks, and like I won't say any of his like swears now, but the way he like just incorporates swears and is just like this totally just yeah, just this frustrated, cynical human who used to be Harry's partner, and just the way that like comes out in his interactions with Harry is just hilarious. I love that guy, and he brings like a lot of levity towards the end of the game too.
Mhm.
I feel. Um,
I mean,
and
even like your interactions with him in the Whirling Rags, when you don't know it's him.
when he's got the blonde wig on
Yeah,
and the
Yeah.
sunglasses.
hilarious in retrospect.
Yeah.
And don't you learn in those interactions that like the blonde and the glasses, I think that was sort of meant to like impersonate the reporter that was part of Harry's task force but then left because he thought it would be a laugh and Harry would recognize it, but then he didn't
Oh, okay, that's amazing.
because he
Yeah,
lost his
I
memory.
remember him definitely impersonating someone specific who Harry was supposed to
Yeah,
know.
yep,
But of course, Harry didn't know because, blackout drunk.
yep.
But yeah, I love how that whole last sequence of the game is kind of just like, in a way, it's like kind of like the a more serious version of the court scene in Chrono Trigger, where like all of your actions throughout the game are like kind of like taken into stock and like
Yeah.
you're forced to kind of like reckon with them and respond to them.
Kim finally weighs in.
Yeah,
Like the
Kim
last
weighs
episode
in.
of Seinfeld.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good one. But yeah, I
Oh,
wonder what would happen if I imagine like everybody got Kim to like them ultimately, because even if you
Yeah.
start the game in a bad spot with Kim, like it's pretty hard to keep shutting him down, rather than bringing him into and forming some kind of relationship with him. But
He's
yeah,
so
like
likable. I even as a person who was trying to annoy him, I couldn't.
yeah, I started the same way this playthrough, and eventually, yeah, he liked me. So yeah, he comes to bat for you, but I imagine if you didn't get it him to like you, then he'll be a bit more critical, and maybe you'll end up with one of the worst endings out of that. Because I think like I'm not sure exactly what the different end states are, but one is like going back to the precinct. You can also like recruit Kim to go back to the precinct with you. But I think the only other one I know is like the worst ending, where you end up not coming back to the precinct at all, and you end up living in that shack on the coast that you've been kind of staying at for free, which is yeah, much darker.
I was just gonna say I love this game. I think it's one of the best. I think it's both one of the best games ever made, and also one of a really strong piece of just fiction in general. I think it stands up with the best fiction in any other genre or form of media, and I think it has a lot to say about um, the kind of world that we live in now, in a way that a lot of games are kind of afraid to comment on. Um, and I think it's also probably the first game that I felt like really nails the idea of like choice and consequence and interactions with other characters in a way that's really satisfying, and handles those like failure states in a way that are just as interesting as if they weren't, if we ask them. To me, it's like the ultimate version of a choose your own adventure novel. And I think that's like the just the thing I come away from it from. It does something that you couldn't do without it being a video game, and it really plays to the strengths of the medium in that way.
Adding off of that, it's just an incredibly satisfying story and one that you are invested in and one that you create yourself. And I think, like we've sort of said, part of that is due to the fact that it is a game. It is a little bit more interactive, and it's just very impressive to me how you're able to use that to just make the story that much more engrossing. And I think one of my main feelings coming away from it is I want to go back. I want to play again and see what happens if I do things differently. I want to try doing one of those playthroughs where you just let every check stay the way it is and see what happens.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite games as well. Just like like for all the reasons you two already mentioned, but also in terms of just like kind of the open-ended role playing it affords. And even though like I know one critique about the game is that the ending is you're kind of pigeonholed into it, and there's no way to actually um fully discover the who done it aspect of the game until the very end. But I think that actually works towards the the fact that this game's really more about the journey that every player takes with it, rather than where that gets you at the end. And ultimately, like all like these different kind of role playing opportunities you had, whether you're going to be an outrageous superstar cop that does a bunch of drugs, or you're going to sober up and become kind of more of a straight edge cop. All those options are there, and like yeah, it's more about just like the emotions that come about in the moment. And we've all been talking about like the different moments in this game that impacted us most, and those are all like very much like our own. And so yeah, that's part of what makes this game so special. That's like definitely in tune with this kind of more like tabletop RPG sensibilities. And yeah, I really hope more games like it come out, because yeah, I loved it both times I've played it, and both times felt very unique in their own ways too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that when we're talking about tabletop and we kind of, think of Dungeons and Dragons first. I mean, I think that it, to me, like on top of all the things you're talking about, it is the way that it has a lore to it, a lore that is so rich and so specific that like it's overwhelming to me at times, but it feels like it has a lore that is richer than like almost any fantasy novel I could read, and that gets to the idea that you're talking about, Ben. Like that it is, as a piece of fiction, I think that it is maybe unparalleled in the video game sphere. There are games that I probably like a little bit more than it because it has some more gameplay to it and it does some more meta narrative things that maybe I find even more interesting. But I can't think of a game that matches the level of thought, and like there are just so many ways in and out of this game, and there are so many ways to approach it and think about it, and there's so many things about it that like there's like over 1 million words of text apparently in total in this game, and that is ludicrous. It's insane how much there is to this game, and how many different ways there are to interact with it, and how it feels like a complete experience regardless of the way that you experience it. And people might complain that you get pigeonholed into it, but I think technically you can clear this game like by day 5 in like 20 hours. Like you don't have to like literally walk around and do every single thing, but I wanted to. It wasn't like I wasn't doing it for a reward, although it made passing late checks easier. I was doing it because it was so good. um, yeah, it's funny. There was an episode of Retro Encounter a while ago where we like decided on like another Essential 10. And I remember kind of arguing with someone for Lunar, which is a game that I probably hold dear to my heart. But this game in the role playing sphere is essential.
Hmm.
Um, it is
Absolutely.
unique and specific, and nothing else since or before. And I haven't played Citizen Sleeper, which I've heard is really good, but nothing that I have touches what this game is doing, and does it with. And it's not just that it's like unique in the sphere; it's that it's unique and it's so good. It's doing something a little bit different from anything I've ever played, but it also does it remarkably well. Um, I think it's an unbelievable game. Honestly, I cannot believe that people made this video game. Which I do want to get to one last topic before we leave. I know we're running a little long here, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. But I do feel like I would feel bad if we walked away without talking about one very brief thing, even though it's not brief. It's been going on for a long time now, which is there's a lot of legal battles surrounding this game, which I think, uh, outside of like the human cost that obviously is being exacted and the human struggles that are happening in real life, not these fictional ones that we're talking about, I think gets to in some ways uh the ways in which people talk about this and have like these really strong opinions on both sides of this argument, or of this clash between the creators of this game, or at least the main creators and the company that they were part of, but also helped create. So it makes it all really fascinating and strange. I think are kind of important to touch on very briefly. There's a 4-hour documentary that was made about it. I have not watched it. I meant to, but school just started for me and I've been busy. But I will watch it at some point. So I know that Ben and Alex, I know you two have watched it. What are your general thoughts on what you know sort of about the legal conflicts surrounding this game?
Yeah, so I can give like a brief overview. Basically, there's a kind of the legal battle is principally between the people who now own the company that developed Disco Elysium and the principal creative leads behind the game. So that would be primarily Robert Kurvitz, who was the lead designer and the lead writer on the game, and then also Alexander Rostov, who was the art director, and then also Helen Hinper, who is was also a writer on the game and is the romantic partner of Robert Kurvitz. And then there are also other developers that were involved with the game and then are no longer with the company that were let go at the same time that those three were let go, but they are not pursuing legal action against the current owners. Um, Essentially, there's accusations that the owners of the company now, who were the principal funders behind the game, wrested control of the company from them, and that's why they're currently engaged in a legal battle to try to either regain ownership or some kind of compensation for what they feel was stolen from them, etc. So
Yeah, so that documentary goes into it's by People Make Games, and they do quite a few interviews with the different parties involved, including the producers, primarily Ilmar Compass, who was not creatively involved with Disco Elysium at all, basically merely like a money man. And then it also goes into interviews with the different writers that were involved on the team and experienced some kind of toxic behaviors from Kurvitz specifically as a leader. They have like a lot of grievances with him, how he wasn't a great leader, didn't communicate things well, and yeah, basically just not like a sustainable working environment. It sounds like, according to their accounts, and one of them was like also one of his best friends, who seemed particularly despondent about the issue. And then they interviewed Kurvitz and Rostov and Hinpier, and uh, like kind of the documentary really kind of pushes them on like the toxicity side of things, which is, I think, on one hand very fair. It sounds like all like the kind of problems that Kurvitz mostly was bringing into the working environment was, as I mentioned, like not sustainable. Like it just like couldn't have gone on that level. It's also probably uh, evident that he was also crunching a lot and facing a lot of pressures from the producers themselves, and as the lead creative, um, yeah, just felt very passionate about the project, but maybe wasn't expressing that in the best ways. I just think one of the important takeaways is here is that um, even though like all of the problems against Curve sound valid, but ultimately he's essentially being along with Rostov and him here being kicked out by the investors and taking who basically took the world that he built away from him. And there's a lot of shady stuff behind that, which is not right. And ultimately, whatever Kurvitz did, his situation is not justified. So um, that's at least my takeaway from the documentary. Really worth a watch if anybody's interested, though.
yeah, I would recommend people watch it too, just because it's like the only extended interviews that exist with members of the creative team that weren't the leads. And so it's very valuable to get their experience. They also cover some of the background of the financial transactions and shady financial dealings of the funders of the project. And one thing to note is that Elmar Compass, his business partner, had been previously convicted of financial crimes, and then fled Estonia, and then was working as an executive producer on Disco Elysium, and making being paid um, by Elmar Compass. So it's a very like tangled, complicated kind of story, but it, it's I think it's not as simple as just like the workers versus capital, but there definitely is that element to it. And even the developers that remain at the company, still most of them say that Pervitz and Rostov and the others should be able to work within the intellectual property of Disco Elysium. And currently they're unable to do that because of the legal situation. So
Yeah, I mean, I even as a person who knows a fair amount about the subject, I haven't watched the documentary. Like, even as you guys are describing it, it's difficult. Like the tangled mess of it is in a way that, and I hate to use fiction to compare it to this, but like I feel like when we talk about things like this, it is so rare to encounter pieces of fiction that I actually think address similar sorts of issues in the full complexity of it, in the way that this game does. And like the fact that this story came out and this issue came out for this game specifically has confounded me even before I played it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
yeah,
Agreed.
it's very interesting because as much as the developers are very left wing, the game was not really created in those circumstances, because they were reliant on the finance capital to create and fund the game.
Right.
Games
Um,
are expensive, yeah.
and they had a team of about, I think, by the end of the release of the original game, not Final Cut, about 30 members on the team. And that required them to get funding through more traditional business means to see the project through to the
Yeah.
end. And this is kind of the result of that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could make a whole podcast in the way that reality meets fiction with this one, right? People have made a 4-hour documentary about it. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I do think it's important to talk about um, just the ways in which uh, fiction and reality are meeting in tragic ways, honestly, regardless of anything else. Like, regardless of whatever Kurvitz did or didn't do, or how toxic or not toxic he was, the idea of creation being taken away from the creator in that kind of way is very troubling to me. So yeah, and in the ways in which they have to rely on capitalism to make a leftist piece of media, it's all, and then the consequences of that. But yeah, that's Disco Elysium, y'all. We could make a whole other episode talk about all the quests we didn't. There's so many details I didn't talk about that I loved in this game. There, it's just such a big game. It takes place in this really small little area, um, but it touches on so many different things. And so, thank you all three of you for coming on for this longer than I intended podcast,
Thank
which is
you.
my style apparently. And
I mean, there's a lot to cover, like you said.
talking to me about this game. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed our conversation.
You could talk about this game for like 12 hours. So
For sure. I would happily do so.
Yep.
So well, let's talk about what's coming up next, which are things that are maybe a little less heady than than Retro Encounter. So as I think I noted on the last episode, this is my last episode sort of as the caretaker of Retro Encounter. Doesn't mean I won't host again or that I won't be on episodes. In fact, I think I'll be on another episode very soon here. But
Thank you.
oh, of course. And Slow C will be back. I think he'll be back I think it'll be next week, but if not, it'll be the week after. He just got back from a long trip, and so I didn't press him too much on the exact date of return. Let him readjust back from Japan. But I can tell you what's coming up next in general. So I know that the next episode is an episode on edutainment games. I know that things like Oregon Trail will probably come up. I've looked at a little bit of the conversation about what they're going to talk about. But I think that'll at least be an interesting listen, even if you didn't like those games. They'll probably talk about how terrible those games are, which I really look forward to. Carmen Sandiego.
Ah, yes.
And I know shortly as well, there's going to be a spoiler cast episode on Final Fantasy 16, which I am at least currently on the episode, but other people want to get on. I have enough words out there about 16 at this point, so we'll see. But I know the next game journal after this will be over a very different kind of cult hit, which is Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter.
Yes.
And that will be our game journal for September. I'm looking forward to listening to those episodes, maybe more than I'm looking forward to playing the game. I'm not going to be playing it, but yeah, so that's what's coming up. We have some other things planned out, but I will let Solosi share those with you when he returns. So in terms of getting in touch with us, if you want to email us, you can email us retro@rpgfan.com. Solosi checks that with some regularity. You can also get in touch with us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on our Discord. We can go follow us on YouTube. We have a Twitch stream almost every day. Scott does amazing work. We are all over the internet. And again, we're on I don't know, like every social media platform and every inevitable Twitter replacement we have. We also have a shop if you want to rep some merchandise from RPG Fan. There's a lot of it there. Mike has done a great job with designing a lot of the stuff there, and I really like a lot of the stuff that we have for the 25th anniversary in particular. We also have 2 other fine podcasts. Random Encounter every 2 weeks about randomness, mostly current events, mostly current games or things that are happening on the site, usually hosted by Jono. And then Rhythm Encounter, which is about RPG music, and other RPG-related music, usually hosted by Mike Salvato, but also often hosted by Hilary. You can review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. We like feedback, especially of the 5-star variety. And before we leave, I'd like to let everybody know how to get in touch with us individually, starting with you, Aleks.
Yeah, you can just email me at tequilasunset@gmail.com. I wish it's just Aleks Franiczek, but yeah.
I guarantee that is already taken and has been taken since 2019. But man, that's a great idea. And Ben, how about you?
Yeah, you can find me at benloganlove@gmail.com.
And finally, Hilary.
So I am Lieutenant W. Freighter Firewalker at gmail.com. Actually, just Hilary at rpgfan.com.
And I have nothing clever to say. So I will instead say you can get in touch with me via email, zachw@rpgfan.com, or you can find me on our Discord at zachw. If you ping me on there, I will see it relatively quickly. And yeah, that's it. We covered a lot of ground. There are many miles to go to cover the rest of this game. Needless to say, if you're listening to this, first of all, why? And haven't played it, why haven't you played it? Go play it. Go check it out. But
it's better experienced.
Exactly.
Seriously, for real.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I'd love to hear, seriously, I usually don't close out with this, but after we get posted, what your experiences were, how they differed from ours. Let us know in any of our social medias. That would be awesome to hear ways in which your experience was totally different from ours. Because I was remarkably unspoiled on this game, and I was very excited for that, and I learned a lot of things about what I could experience here. I'd like to hear more. So anyway, thank you, listeners. Good night, and good luck.